Ukraine is an offensive, and it is some invader or something like Noit is note, it is a part of the defensive operation. At the same time, I would like to remind you that this nuclear state acted as an aggressor against Ukraine, and therefore Ukraine acts in accordance with the norms of international laws since they never thought that the war could move to their territory. The fighting in the Skanbelg regions. This shows Putin's weakness and in fact undermines his authority in Russian society. Hello and welcome to Ukraine and Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media. Center and NJ Euro Atlantic Forest, and I'm your host Marava. Youth operation by the Armed Forces of Ukraine in the Kursk region is the most effective offensive of the entire war. Ukrainian intelligence identified weak points in the Russian defenses and special forces crossed the border in advance to prepare the area. When the Armed Forces of Ukraine crossed the Russian border on August 6, it was a textbook example of what strategists call a combined military maneuver. Thanks to the operation in this region, Ukraine not only changed the course of the war with Russia butils to strengthen the resolve of its allies. Ukraine may be able to lure 3 southern Russian soldiers into a pocket. Once captured, they could become a valuable bargaining chip for many Ukrainian POVs shelled in Russia. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the strategic aspect of the Kursk operation and why Ukraine decided to cross the Russian border and occupy some of its territory. If you want to learn more about this subject, please continue watching this video and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss our videos in the future. The primary goal of the operation was to shift the mood within Russia, making the war less appealing and turning key figures against Vladimir Putin. Additionally, after last year's unsuccessful counter-offensive, Ukraine needed a moral boost with this operation. Zelensky reminded Ukrainians that victory is still possible. This message also resonated with Ukraine's allies in Europe, and some of whom had started to question their support for a war that seemed unwinnable now. It's clear that if our NATO partners permit the use of long-range missiles in Rus, Ukraine will continue to make gains. The third objective of this offensive is to pull Russian forces out of Ukraine. Capturing many prisoners of war was also crucial for future exchanges. Now, the mothers of Russian conscripts are advocating for continued prisoners swaps, experience security policy, and I'll talk more about. Well, there are a lot of human analysts analyzing the Kursk operation from the bottom to the top, saying and describing whatever is happening there. But today, I also wanted to speak about. I wanted also to give you my opinion about that. Of course, we could discuss how it was conducted and what the outcomes will be with this from this operation. And then what would this operation show us? But basically, I'm not going to that details. I wanted to stress out only 3 points. The first of all, that saying that it was brilliant operation. I believe it was brilliant because it was an answer to the Russian strategy of the meat grinder, and the strategy was well exploited and well used by Russians on the front lines, and they were just going forward, just destroying everything. And one could simply try to find something else to seize the initiative, which is basically what happened. And what I would say that this asymmetric and swear is the really good try to seize the initiative. We saying again, whatever the outcome would be from the operation. And we could, just discuss these viral outcomes, what may happen, in or after, during, or after this operation. But the main point is clear that what we see here, that in the era of total info flow and to tall monitoring of informat, some covered operations and the big size covered operations are still a possible, soon could conduct in this satellite era, and one can conduct really covered operations and then give the really asymmetric. I also mentioned already asymmetric surprise actions to the enemy. Second thing I would also say here that one could realize that when world speaks that Ukrainians have to behave to defense their cities, the country, and then everything else. Well, this kind of defense, his is on the one hand this. Is this right? You have to defense your territory and then the cities and the villages and everything else. But at the same time, any successful offensive operation in this scope of being, just on the defense here is also the part of the defense. And then this is this. I would say the active defense, which basically does not go out from these frames. Saying that Ukraine is on offensive and it is some invader or something like, no, it is not. It is a part of the defensive operation. And it is especially designed, again, to conduct successful defensive operations. Where else, I also wanted to stress that it is really important because we already saw several times that any future planned operations, somehow were revealed and somehow were discussed before that happened. So informational silence was also a part of this operation. It's a good part, and I'm surprised. I'm really pleased that Ukraine inside didn't do any announcements as it was before the offensive in the last year, and all this press and and Telegram and all these meal bloggers, they were shouting from Ryuheri every of devices saying that, well, Ukrainian would be on offense, and then the offensive was failure. Now, this time we see that Ukrainians also learned to be in the, I would say, a informational silence, which basically helped to conduct successful operation, and it still continues, which is also is really well from my side, saying that, well, good we have to keep the silence in order to maintain this initiative, and then keep on moving forward. If Vladimir Putin responds to the events in the region by mobilizing forces, it could be in an even worse position that he is now. Therefore, he is downplaying the cooperation and trying to restrain the Ukrainian military with a minimal number of forces. Russian control over the mass media is strong enough for propaganda to support this narrative. The Russians are very afraid of fighting in the city of Keskits, sift the Ukrainian military advance that far Russian authorities are unwilling to acknowledge the possibility of such an event and fail to realize that the work could backfire on them. Jan Moth, the director of the Institute of World Polity, will share his thoughts on this historic Ukrainian military operation. The offensive operation of Ukrainian troops in the Ko region, which is still ongoing, has every reason to take its place in history. This is the first time when the troops of another state entered the territory of a nuclear state, the largest in the world. At the same time, I would like to remind you that this nuclear state acted as an aggressor against Ukraine, and therefore Ukraine acts in accordance with the norms of international law. Russia will not declare war on Ukraine because if it does, it will put Ukraine on the par with itself, and this is absolutely disadvantageous for the Kremlin. The Kremlin handed over the fight against the Ukrainian offensive to the special services, Bortnikov and Dime Minar persons who enjoy Putin's special trust, and I think this will continue. However, Russia received every powerful blow, and a large number of Russian prisoners of war can become a factor in destabilizing the situation in the country. Therefore, their Utsman Moscow initiated negotiations on the exchange of prisoners in Ukraine. I hope we'll try to change all for all today. With its offensive, Ukraine has postponed possible negotiations with Russia indefinitely. It has demonstrated to the West, China, and India, as well as to the global South as a whole, the Russia is not as strong and powerful as it appears at first glance. That is why Ukraine is making history, and West should be proud of it. As noted by scholar of the law of war, Yoram Denstein, military operations in a self-defense war can legitimately occur anywhere in the war zone without the need for artificial geographical limitations convenient for the aggressor. It would be absurd to claim that a victim of aggression cannot conduct hostilities on the aggressor territory, especially when this territory is used to launch attacks. The cooperation should not be seen as a separate conflict, but as part of the broader conflict caused by Russian aggression against Ukraine under international law. The right to self-defense. Legalize all actions aimed at repelling aggression. More on that, please welcome journalist and writer Yura Lukanov. We have a long history, and in certain years of this history, the territories Kusan Belga regions of present-day Russia were parts of Ukraine. A lot of people still speak Ukrainian there, but it doesn't mean that we occupied these territories in order to cut them off from Russia and annex them to Ukraine, respect international law, and believe that countries must stay within their recognized international borders in accordance with international agreements. And Ukraine and Russia sign such agreements with each other. This is what makes us different from Russia, from Putin, who explained his military adventures by saying that he was going to return historically Russian territories to Russia. Russia, that is, he considers all of Ukraine, with the exception of Galia, to be such a territory, besides she calls a single people, but says that Ukrainians are brainwashed and don't realize that they are actually Russians. This is absolutely imperialistic thinking. So, why did Ukraine cross the Russian border and occupy part of its territory? Firstly, in the Russians' view, a leader of the state enjoys authority if he shows strength. You can come to another country, occupy its territory, and defend high. Scoutry, since they never thought that the war could move to their territory. The fighting in the Skinbelg regions. So shows Putin's weakness and in fact undermines his authority in Russian success and may shake Putin's totalitarian regime to the point that it may fall. This is one of the goals. The Skandis demoralization actually it is within the framework of the first idea. Russian society as well as the Russian army is being demoralized because they could not imagine that they could suffer such defeats. Russian servicemen seem to give the Myselvzup in the hundreds, and there are probably 600 prisoners during this time. This means that the Ukrainian exchange fund has grown by 1.5. So all this is done to speed up Ukraine's victory. And there is another very important point. We've crossed another red line, and the Russian constantly promise through the mouths of their leadership that as soon as red line is crossed, they will use nuclear weapons. The Ukrainians should finally cross the thickest red line, occupying part of Russia's territory. and what not thing non-nuclear weapons were, said they will obviously never use it. This move dispels Western fears that the fearsome Putin will use something that will make the whole West shudder. This opens the way, takes away the arguments of those who have been slowing down the provision of weapons to Ukraine, fearing that the Russians will respond with a nuclear strikes. So this offensive, the occupation of part of the Russian territory, has only one goal: the capitulation of Russia, victory for Ukraine. And of course, when it's all over, we'll return the Russian territory to its owners, so to speak. That is, will ara. At Ternita Russia, you've been watching a special project by Ukraine Media Center, an Euro-Atlantic course dedicated to the Russian-Ukrainian war. Ukraine and flames in the description under this video. You can find information on how you can help Ukraine fight Russian aggression, if I you.